We really believe that we are not just a church with small groups, where it's just another ministry that's offered and, hey, take advantage of it if you feel like it's necessary. We really feel that we are a church rather, of small groups, where that's how we do church. If you look at the New Testament, especially the book of Acts, they gathered together in people's homes, they broke bread, they listened to the teachings of the disciples, they prayed together, they shared things that they had in need. They lived in clusters of community that then came to be known as the church. And we do church oftentimes in America very differently than the first century church. We have a tendency to do church in rows when church in circles is much more impactful. Because of the relational connections. And so we come together here on Sundays and we celebrate, but what we want to be doing is celebrating today what God has done throughout the week in small clusters in people's homes and in coffee shops and here at the church and different groups and rooms and so on and so forth. And so I encourage you to be a part of that process. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been involved in a teaching series entitled Getting Out of the Boat. And the idea is that we're trusting God in new ways, or endeavoring to trust God in new ways. The boat is whatever that we typically put our trust in other than God. We've been looking at the Matthew's Gospel, the Matthew's account of when Jesus was walking on the water. And we're going to read through that again today. Matthew 15, beginning with verse 22. It says, immediately after this, immediately after Jesus had just fed the 5,000 or broke the bread and fed those that were there. Some had estimated if you add women and kids, there's probably closer to 10 or 12 or even 15,000 that were there. But after this great miracle that had occurred, Jesus insisted that the disciples get back into the boat and cross over to the other side of the lake. And while he sent the people home, and after he sent them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. And night fell when he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came towards them, walking on the water. The disciples saw him walking on the water, and they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once, and he said, "Don't be afraid." If you have the NIV, it says, immediately he said to them, "Don't be afraid, take courage, I'm here." Then Peter called out, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come." Walking on the water, "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat, walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" Then they climbed back into the boat. The wind stopped. The disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. In this, we see immediate, the word immediate mentioned 3 different times. And that's the kind of Jesus we like. We like the decisive Jesus. We like when the questions are asked or the prayers are uttered that immediately he responds. He immediately gives us direction and tells us what to do. When we find ourselves in trouble, he immediately addresses it. He responds, and immediately the winds and the waves calm down. We like that kind of stuff. When we're sinking, we want him to immediately grab us and to save us. However, there's something in this story that it's a big part of the story that we read just kind of in passing, and we oftentimes don't really give it much thought, especially if you're reading a version other than the New Living. Because in other translations it says, at the 4th watch, Jesus came walking on the water. Now when we read this, we say, oh, the 4th watch, and we think, okay, I'm not quite sure what that means, so I'll just continue to get to the part that I like. Jesus walking on the water, Peter walking on the water, Jesus immediately saving Peter, and then immediately the winds and the waves calmed down. But the Romans had 4 watches, if you will. Not watches like types of watches, but like guard watches. And the 4th watch began about 3 a.m. Now we know, we kind of skip over that if we have the New Living Translation, because it says about 3 a.m. Jesus shows up. But you don't have to be a math whiz to figure out that these guys have been on the water before night fell, because that's what Jesus said. That's when he went up to the mountain to pray, or up by himself to pray, and then it became dark. So these guys have been on the water for some time by themselves, fighting the winds and the waves and fearing for their lives. Which kind of begs the question, if Jesus was going to show up, walking on the water, to declare his glory and to show his glory and to reveal his power to these guys, why delay? Why not just do it? Let's just wait till they get out at a safe distance, kick up some winds, some waves, get them nervous, and then I come showing up. The power of God is still displayed. The power of God is still obvious and evident. It's not like, well, if he shows up walking 4 hours later, that's really cool. But if he does it at 30 minutes, well, yeah, anybody can do it after 30 minutes. No. Why the delay? If he's there to show, and he talks about the idea of him walking on the water to reveal the glory of God, why delay? Why wait? Why wait till they're struggling? Why wait till they're wondering if God had abandoned them? Why wait to the point when they think that maybe Jesus had forgotten them? Because this is the life that we live. There are times in life in which they will ask again, and we often ask, where is God? Why won't he help? When will the answer come? And if we don't know how to respond to the inevitable delays that show up in our path, there's a very real potential that our faith can be torpedoed by the lack of answered prayer, by the delay, which leads to the tragic lie that says, well, if God is absent, if God is silent, maybe he's absent. Or worse, maybe there really isn't a God. That's something that religious people conjure up to create crutches for people that are weak. You ever heard that? These are things that religious people conjure up to manipulate those that are faint of heart, to prop them up with false security and false hopes. If God isn't answering my prayer and doing what I need for him to do, well, maybe, just maybe, there isn't really a God. Or worse, maybe there is a God, but he doesn't care about me or what I'm dealing with. So why should I bother? And faith and hope is lost. So that is our background. The fact that God could have gone earlier and walked on the water, but chose to delay intentionally. That's being our backdrop. I want to examine another story when Scripture reveals a time, and it's not even something that we have to ponder or wonder. Jesus chooses to delay, causing people to wonder. And I think as we examine it, we can discover possibly for the first time, or maybe be reminded, that we can navigate through and walk through difficult times and still know that God not only exists, but is with us. We don't have to associate and link our difficulty to the character of God. Now, this story, as I begin to share it, most of us, if not all of us, can tell the ending of the story. But I'm going to ask you to do something. Now, it's kind of like very difficult to do. But I'm going to ask you to try to pretend you don't know the ending of the story. And we can work through the story together. And in doing so, I want you to experience possibly the emotions of the people that were experiencing it in real time. We have this 20/20 hindsight. We know what happens at the end. We know it all works out. But these guys didn't know that. When they found themselves in the midst of the delayed response or reply of Jesus, they find themselves in tremendous emotional turmoil. The story that we're going to look at is found in John's Gospel, chapter 11. A man named Lazarus was sick. I know, you know the end of the story. But let's just hang out here for a minute. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. And this is the Mary who poured expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus, telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." Another translation, the NIV says, the Lord sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." These guys were close, personal friends. Now, I want you to keep in mind that these people have been with Jesus, they've hung with Jesus, they've seen him do miraculous things. They've seen him stand for hours in the sun and heal person after person after person. They've seen him heal the sick. They've seen deaf people become hearing. They've seen blind eyes open. They've seen leprous bodies cleansed. They've seen crippled limbs strengthened. They've seen it all. They've hung with Jesus. They had front row seats to all of this. They saw him heal Gentiles, Romans, godless people. Surely, your BFF, when he gets sick, Jesus is going to show up. That's the thinking. They're thinking, well, just make sure, I know he's sick, and I know he's really sick, but all we have to do is make sure word gets to Jesus. Because if word gets back to Jesus, then everything else will take care of itself. Because we know this. There was no doubt, there was no reservation, there was no concern. They knew that as soon as word got to Jesus, he would fix whatever was ailing Lazarus, because they had seen him do it over and over and over again. But when Jesus heard about this, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. And this is where there's a whole new category that gets created in our heads that we oftentimes are uncomfortable with. No, Lazarus' sickness, happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. This is a whole new category. Now, we get the God's judgment category. The guy's sick because God has brought judgment upon him, because that's oftentimes our normal understanding and view of God. When we mess up, we're looking for the lightning bolts to come crashing down. We get that. You know, we see it in the Scripture. It was a profound, prevailing view of the time. This one was deaf. This one was blind. Who sinned? That was the question. Who sinned? Did the guy sin or his parents? Somebody had to sin, because obviously their ailment is the judgment of God upon them, so that all would know and all would fear God and all would live this narrow life and do what they're told when they're told to do it, lest the judgment of God show upon them or their offspring. That was the prevailing understanding. So that all of a sudden Jesus said, no. Lazarus is not going to end up dead. Well, he's going to die, but he's not going to end up dead. But this isn't because of someone else's sin or judgment. This is so the glory of God can be revealed. They're like, wait a minute, what is that all about? We understand that other category of judgment. We also understand the Jonah category. I'm running from God. And God all of a sudden wants to get our attention. How many of us have we said that, right? All of a sudden, the person finds themselves sick. And before, they were just ignoring God. They weren't going to church. They were doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, they get sick, or they're faced with one of their kids or their parents. And all of a sudden, they find themselves back in church. We understand. Our category for, I'm running from God and God getting our attention. We got a category for that, because that fits our understanding of God. Because sometimes He's a mean God that rattles our cage to make sure that we do what we're supposed to do. Or so that's what we think, or that's what we buy into, and that's what we understand. But this category is a new one. This happened, this sickness happened, so that the glory of God could be revealed. And then it goes on, it says in verse 5 of chapter 11, so although Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus, he stayed there where he was for the next 2 days. And I think it's interesting that John, this is the second time the relationship is emphasized. First of all, it's the message going to Jesus. John wanted to make sure that this relationship was known. This wasn't just some guy in Bethany that got sick and sent word to Jesus to stop what he was doing and help this guy that's really on death's door. John's gospel makes it very clear that the relationship between Lazarus and Jesus was a tight one. It was close. They loved each other. They were probably in a small group together. They were in a small group together. And then he goes back and he says this again. He said, although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And I don't know about you, but if I'm the one sick, I'm saying, what? If you know the condition that I'm in, and you got word that I'm in this condition, yet you're still hanging out where you're hanging out, I got a problem with that. Why are you staying where you're staying when you... It's one thing, it's like, did he get the word? Are you sure he got the word? Did he sign the receipt? Can I see that the package has been delivered? Look up the code, the tracking number. Did he actually receive the word? Yeah, oh yeah, he got the word. Well, then where is he? He decided to stay where he was for another 2 days. And I think one of the reasons, that John makes such a specific emphasis about the relationship that they loved him and he loved them and back and forth, was that sometimes the first thing that we wonder about God when prayers go unanswered. You don't hear or see people thinking, well, can Jesus still heal? Maybe that's why he's waiting. Maybe his ability to heal is evaporated. All of a sudden, he's met his quota for the healing power for the month. And he can't heal Lazarus. Maybe that's why he's delayed. He can't heal, and he's trying to figure out a way to break the news to Mary and Martha. No, we don't think that Jesus can't heal all of a sudden. Any more than our situation, when we find delayed answers, we don't all of a sudden think that God's power is all of a sudden evaporated. What's the first thing that we challenge and wonder? Does he still love me? Does he still care? Does he still know my address? Does he still know my name? Or is he too busy doing other things? And I think that's one of the things that John wanted to make sure that we understood. This delay had nothing to do with their relationship. This delay had nothing to do with the quantity of his love for them or theirs for him. Any more than his love for you has anything to do with delayed answered prayer. There are some times you'll find yourself laboring at the oars in a storm, wondering if you'll ever even survive or you'll end up at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. And you're waiting. God's power to walk on that water hasn't changed. Yet you're by yourself. And it's not till 3 o'clock in the morning that he shows up. These guys, it wasn't even hours, it was days. Finally, he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. But his disciples objected. Rabbi, they said, only a few days ago, the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again? Now, don't you love the concern of the disciples for Jesus? These guys weren't concerned about Jesus. They're like, Jesus, when we're with you and they're throwing rocks at you, some of them have bad aim. See, right here, not here, but right about here. I got hit with one of those rocks that had your name on it. That was just 2 days ago, and we beat feet out of there. Now you want to go back? I'm guessing some of them may have rocks nearby still. And then Jesus replied, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light. Don't you love it when Jesus does this? If you're reading the New Testament, all of a sudden there's this legitimate question. Hey, if we go back to Judea, we may get beat up. They may throw rocks at us and get hit in the head with these rocks. And Jesus is like, yeah, I know. And by the way, did you know that there are 12 hours in a day? You're like, dude, what does that have to do with anything? What are you talking about? And most of us, we sit there, we read that, we go, dude, what are you talking about? And then we just skip to the next verse. Because we have no idea what he's talking about. But what is Jesus is trying to teach his disciples is about opportunity. During the daytime, when the sun is up, you have the opportunity to do things that you can't do at night. They didn't want to go back because they were afraid. It's as if Jesus is saying, listen, you guys can stay here. You can. You can stay here where it's safe. But if you go with me, I'm going to give you an opportunity to see something great in the midst of your fear. In the midst of the challenge, in the midst of the obstacles, in the midst of the opposition, if you go with me, there's an opportunity for you to see something amazing. You can stay here where it's comfortable, where it's safe, where things are fine. But if you travel with me, I'll give you a new opportunity to see the power of God displayed like you can never even imagine. And I think sometimes God is calling us to the same. You can stay in your boat. You can stay in that place of safety, that place of refuge, or that place of security. But if you trust me, yeah, there's going to be opposition. There may even be some people that want to take you out. But if you trust me and walk with me, I will show you something that you will remember for the rest of your life. Then they said, he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but we will go and wake him up. And the disciples thought, oh, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will soon get better. They thought Jesus meant that Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus had meant Lazarus had died. And so he told him plainly, no, Lazarus is dead. And then we find one of the most insensitive statements in all of Scripture. Jesus said, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. If you're a disciple, again, I know we know the end of it, but think about this situation. You're in this thing, you delayed on purpose. Jesus says that Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad I wasn't there to change it for your sakes. For our sakes. You knew he was going to die. You delayed on purpose to ensure that he would die. And you're glad you weren't there for us. He says, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. Talk about a new category. You trying to say that sometime God allows difficulties in our lives so that we can then firsthand come to a greater understanding of the depth and the understanding and level of God's power? That's what this text seems to indicate. And then Thomas shows up. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, says to his fellow disciples, all right, let's go with him. We might as well just die too. There's always one in the group. Every group's got one, right? You know, Pooh had Eeyore. So, all right. I read this and I think of Eeyore. All right. Might as well, we're going to die we're going to die at some point anyways. We might as well get it over with. Go back. They can hit me in the head with a stone, and at least we'll die with Jesus. We have people like that in the church. All right. My small group's going to fail anyways. I might as well do a group this semester and get it over with so everybody knows that I'm a miserable failure. You see it here too. It's like, Thomas, let's go and die with Jesus. Lazarus is dead. They're going to try to kill him. When they're done with Jesus, they'll kill us. Let's go. Then Jesus arrived at Bethany. You can't imagine Jesus thinking to himself, I'm about to raise a guy from the dead. And I got Lazarus over here, full of faith, thinking, all right, let's just all die with him. And you got to think that sometime, I mean, I know we think of Jesus, he holds lambs and he floats and he's got glows around. But you got to think at some point he wants to smack Thomas. You got to think that. Or is it just me? Listen, I just fed 15,000 people, Thomas. We stole a kid's lunch and we fed a whole town. Come on, work with me. All right. There was a storm. Remember that storm, Thomas? When the winds and the waves were all kicking up, the boat was falling apart. I walked on water. Work with me, Thomas. Work with me. I walked on water. And then I made Peter walk on water. Do you remember that? Then I got in the boat and all the wind stopped automatically, immediately. Who do you think did that, Thomas? Just out of the blue. What do you think? How did that just happen? Remember, you guys worship because you recognize the power of God? And I'm like, listen, let's go back to Judea. He's not going to remain asleep. Trust me on this. I know you're afraid, but look at the opportunity that is before us. All right. Yeah, I'll go. Might as well know the day I'm going to die. Jesus arrived in Bethany. He was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. And this is significant. Sometimes, I thought 3 days would have been cooler because I thought that would mirror the resurrection of Christ. And I think, it would have been much easier to preach. But it says 4 days. So I was thinking, why 4 days and not 3? 3 would have been so much easier because we could have paralleled it. We could have said, this is a foreshadowing of his resurrection and all of that. But why 4 days? And you do some research and some studying, you discover that 4 days is when the people of that day felt that the Spirit would depart. After they felt that in those days that when someone died, the Spirit hovered over the body. And it wasn't until the fourth day, after what we would know as the natural decomposition process had taken place, that this spirit that was hovering over the body no longer recognized the body and therefore couldn't re-inhabit the body. After 2 days, the spirit's hovering, thinking, I know who that is. And I can re-inhabit him. 2 days, he doesn't look good, but I still know him. Fourth day, this is like one of those movies, Zombies Return. I don't know who that is. I'm out of here. And so the prevailing view of the time was 4 days. And he's really dead. Not mostly dead, really dead. Some of you know the reference there. Not mostly dead, really, really dead. So in other words, Jesus didn't just raise a guy that was almost dead and the spirit was still in there hovering around and he just reconnected the two. He took a corpse that was really dead, no hope for resurrection. He takes that was totally impossible, where the spirit had already departed, and he calls him forth. And so Martha said to Jesus, or wait a minute, I'm skipping ahead. Bethany was only a few miles down the road, and many of the people were coming to console Mary and Martha that they're lost. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Why do you think Mary stayed in the house? Pouting. She was pouting. She was angry. She was hurt. She was frustrated. She was doing what we do. When Jesus doesn't answer our prayer requests or our needs or fix our stuff when in the timetable and the fashion way we want it done. You could have, you should have, but you didn't. Do you really love us? You heal strangers, but not your best friend. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, I know. Yes. He will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. She's like, I heard that at the funeral. Everybody kept saying that to me. And do we say the same thing? Right? Don't let your hearts be troubled. You know, we tell that to people. Listen, you'll see them again. This isn't the end. And we say, yeah. And Martha says the same. I know it's not the end. I know that. I get that. I heard it from all the relatives at the funeral. I know I'll see them again. And he'll rise again. But if you were here a couple days ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation because you would have healed him. But you weren't, and he's dead. And I've got to deal with the pain and the horror of living out the rest of my life without my brother. Because you chose to delay. We sit there, and you got to applaud Martha because she at least was honest with him. And Jesus goes on, and he told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And then he asks her the question. Do you believe this? It's easy to believe it in kids' church. It's easy to believe it at kids' camp. But what about when you've lived some life? When the answers go unanswered. And I'm not talking about the ones, Lord, give me a parking spot in front of the mall because it's busy. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the big ones. I'm talking about the ones, God, I've been out of work for 6 months. The unemployment is out and running out. I don't know where I'm going to pay for food. I'm talking about the ones when you're kneeling beside your bed and you're looking at your kid who's dying of leukemia. And the doctors have run all that poison through their bodies time and time again. And they're saying, I don't know what else we can do. I'm talking about those prayers that really matter. And it seems as though heaven is brass. I'm talking about those dreams that have been dead and buried and now are encapsulated within a tomb and smell. And Jesus shows up and says, do you believe? Jesus replied, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So he says, roll the stone away. Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I say it out loud for the sake of the people that are standing here so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands, his feet bound with grave clothes, and his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw that happen. They recognized that there's nothing that God cannot do. Why doesn't God do something about my situation? The simple answer is this: we just don't know sometimes. But this story and others teach us that He can, but sometimes He waits. But we can still trust Him in the meantime.